1. This happened about 5 years ago, so please be patient with me as I may not remember every detail or moment exactly correctly. That being said, this whole experience is burned pretty intensely in my mind, so I remember about 90% of it pretty well. I am a 26-year-old man, making me about 21 when this event occurred. I live in southern Ohio, about 45 minutes away from Cincinnati. I went to a smaller college in the area, and I was pretty isolated from most of my friends and family during the week. My friends all went to their various choices of college throughout the Midwest, and my family remained in my hometown. I ended up at a school alone because I had a rather specific major, and this was one of the few colleges in my country that would accommodate me. Luckily, my girlfriend went to college fairly close to me, so I would often find myself making 2 to 3 trips a week to see her and study with her. On most weekends, I would go on road trips to visit my friends, considering their campuses were a lot bigger and more fun than my small college town. During this particular weekend in question, I was getting ready to make about a 2-hour trip to see my friend Kyle at his school, the name of which I probably shouldn't disclose. I had made the same trip about 30 times before, so I knew the route pretty well at this point, and didn't even have to use GPS to get there. I left on Friday afternoon once I was done with classes for the day, and I was set to arrive at Kyle's dorm at about 8 o'clock, right on time to go out for a night of binge drinking and eating garbage food. Oh, the joys of college. I set off at about 5:50 and was roughly 15 minutes into my trip when my girlfriend called me. This was pretty unusual, considering I had already told her I was driving to Kyle's, so I answered quickly, thinking something must have been wrong. She was working that night and her car had broken down in her dorm room parking lot when she was leaving to go work her shift. She figured I wasn't too far into my trip and wanted to know if I could give her a quick ride to work before I got too far away. Me, being the dutiful boyfriend I was, agreed to come get her since I was only about 20 minutes from her location. I was already pretty far off campus, so I pulled over my car on the highway and used GPS to see if there was a faster route to her from where I was. The map in my phone revealed that there was an exit coming up that would take me to a side street that I could use to get to her fairly quickly, so I texted her that I was on my way and set off towards my new destination. I had seen the exit in question plenty of times, but I never had any reason to get off on it. So once I exited the highway, my surroundings were completely unfamiliar to me. The exit took me off onto a road that had dense woods on the right side and the highway on the left side. My phone informed me that my next turn wasn't for about 5 miles, so I had a ways to go until I had to do any navigating. About a half-mile later, the road had turned, and there were now trees on either side of me, and to be honest, it was a really beautiful sight. It was October, so the surrounding woods were a mixture of various warm colors, and I was actually really enjoying my little detour. The entire area was wooded on either side, with only the occasional break in tree line for a driveway and a mailbox to poke out. The houses were hard to see through the trees, but from the few glimpses I did manage to get, the houses were actually pretty nice. It was getting a little dark, and I had about a mile to go before I had to turn when I noticed a Toyota with the hood popped open further down the road. As I approached, I noticed a man in a shirt and tie with his head under the hood, seemingly with a broke-down car. There was no traffic to be seen behind me, so I stopped for a moment to ask him if everything was okay and if he needed to borrow my phone or anything. He didn't seem to hear me at first, so, a little louder this time, I said, "Everything okay?" This time he seemed to have heard me, and he lifted his head up from the engine and looked up at me. He seemed like a completely normal guy, and he had a normal face to match. The best way I could describe him is just pedestrian looking. He had short brown hair, brown eyes, and a 5 o'clock shadow. He smiled at me and said he was on his way home from work and that something had gone wrong with his engine. I offered him my phone in case he wanted to call anyone to get picked up or get the car towed. He replied, "Oh no, that's okay. I have a car service that will come get my car for me. They're closed until tomorrow morning, though. So I hate to ask, but could Could you possibly give me a ride to my brother's house? He lives only like 4 minutes away from here. This absolutely should have been a red flag for me. I think I was a little stunned by how normal this guy seemed, considering most hitchhikers on TV are crazy or are ex-murderers. Why couldn't he have used my phone to call his brother? I guess I wasn't thinking clearly at the time, but hindsight is 20/20, and I'm well aware I made a bad decision that night. I was physically much bigger than him, and he was driving a nice car, so I figured he wasn't a weirdo or local crazy person, and I could overpower him if need be. So I agreed to give him a quick ride to his brother's house, since it was on the way to my girlfriend's, who would later be livid with me for taking so much time to get her to work. But that's a story for a different time. I unlocked the door for him to get in, and he pointed me in the direction of his brother's house, and we set off on our way. Things were pretty normal for a few minutes, and I was starting to feel like maybe I did the right thing. Then, things started to get weirder. The first thing that made me uncomfortable was the way he acted every time there was a swear word in the music I was listening to. He was almost flinching every time 50 Cent said, "fuck" or "bitch." And I picked up on it pretty quickly, so I changed the song, thinking that he was just really against swearing or something. About a minute after I changed the song, there was no swearing in this one, he reached up and slammed his hand on the radio's power button and turned it off. It wasn't crazy hard or anything, but it was definitely enough to get me to notice. I tried to make light of the situation and said, "Not your style." This question was met with complete silence. At this point, I was ready for this guy to get out of my car, so I asked, "How much further do we have to go? I have to be somewhere soon and I can't be late." He said we had about 4 minutes to go, which immediately sent up warning signals in my head, considering he had told me the same thing about 8 minutes ago. I decided that was enough. I didn't think he was dangerous or anything, but I figured our destination was further than he was letting on, and he was lying so that I would take him despite the distance. It was getting late, and I wasn't trying to face my girlfriend's wrath, so I told him this was as far as I could go and he'd have to walk the rest of the way. His mood changed immediately, but instead of getting angry, which I was completely expecting, he became panicky and was practically begging me to take him the rest of the way. His overreaction set off pretty much every alarm I had in my head, so I told him to remove himself from my car before I had to remove him myself. It was then he pulled out his rather oversized wallet and offered to pay me to take him the rest of the way. He tried to pull out a stack of $20 bills, but as he removed them from his wallet, something else fell out of his wallet onto the seat next to him. It was only a split second before he grabbed it and shoved it back into his pocket, but I got a good enough look at it for it to haunt me to this day. Along with his money, a small Ziploc bag full of what I'm confident were adult teeth fell out of his wallet. Front teeth, molars, you name it. Everyone I've told this story to has been skeptical of this part, but I'm confident that was what I saw. I freaked out worse than I ever have and screamed at him to get out of my car, and he got out immediately and was looking at me with surprised eyes on the side of the road. I took off and called the police, who simply told me not to pick up hitchhikers ever again, and that they couldn't do anything since the man didn't commit any crimes. I don't know where he was going or what he was doing, and I'm pretty sure I don't want to know. I do know, however, that he seemed to have all of his teeth still in his mouth. I don't know whose teeth those were, or why he had them. But creepy teeth hitchhiker, let's never meet again. 2. I'm new at this, so I'll start it simple. I was around 16 years old when this happened to me. I'm female. It was just me and my dad at our house, and since he was a businessman that travelled frequently, I was left home alone quite often. First of all, I'm going to try to do my best to describe to you the layout of my house so you can better understand my situation. My house is pretty small since it's just my father, my dog, and me living in it. There's a long hallway with full-sized windows separating my dad's room and mine. Our dog loved to look out the windows, so we always kept them open enough for her to look out. I'm the last room at the end of the hallway. In between the two rooms is my bathroom and a spare room. All the rest is irrelevant. Let's get to it. It was around 11 p.m. when the worst night of my life began. My dad was passed out in bed after a long day, and I was mindlessly dancing around the house getting ready for bed. I hopped in my shower, not knowing what was coming ahead, and of course, like a cringe-worthy horror movie, my dog starts aggressively barking up a storm. With my excessive knowledge of how it turns out for the girl in the movies, I go out and explore. I head to my room to throw some clothes on while my dog is still shitting a brick. Months before, I'm not sure how, I managed to break my door handle. But you don't have to twist the knob to open it, all it needs is a small push. Scared shitless, I barely managed to put a shirt on when my dog opened the door. I looked to see her enter my room while in the midst of barking. And that's when I saw it. There's only one window that has vision to the opening of my room, and in the corner of it I saw a face. A face so seemingly sinister that I can still see it years after. It was dark, so I took a second to comprehend what I just saw. But when I finally realized it, I screamed. My dad owns lots of guns, so when he heard me scream bloody murder, he ran out with a pistol. He asked me what happened, and I could barely mutter what I saw. He ran outside to see if the man with the terrifying face was still near. We stood out there for a minute scanning the area. A man was casually strolling towards us from the opposite direction, from about 100 yards away. I knew it was him. I got that feeling in my stomach that you can't mistake. It was like he was trying to cover up that he was there by coming from a different direction. That bastard didn't fool me. You better stay the fuck away from my daughter. You see what I have here? You know what this does? Holding up his gun. I could have sworn my dad was going to shoot. The man brushed these threats off easily. Fuck off, old man, he said. My dad and I went back inside. He went to bed like nothing had happened, but I could not sleep a wink. I kept thinking he was going to come back and hurt me because of the threats to him. We called the cops the next morning, and they came and scoped out our house. He looked around the house trying to calm me down, but I was still pretty shaken up. He went to the front yard, and that's when he saw it. In front of the windows in the long hallway, there were small bushes, nothing much. The cop, from outside, went to the window that had the view of my room, and there it was. If he tried to tell me the news without making me more upset, he failed. There were indents in the dirt right in front of the window. That meant he knew where he needed to look for you, and it seems as if he had come here more than once because of the broken pieces of bush and the divots in the ground. Turns out, he was the nephew of my old neighbor, and he had been staying there for months. Never arrested, never got in trouble, barely got a slap on the wrist. But at least he was gone now. How long had he been watching me? I'll never know. All I know is I keep my door shut, and I never keep the blinds open. So creepy nephew that had watched me for who knows how long. Let's not meet. 3. The following story occurred in June of 2017. For some context, I live in a fairly major city bordering a great lake, and I live pretty much right off the coast, about 3 or so blocks inland off the lake. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend of 5 years, Julia, and our 2 goofy-ass cats. We both work full-time. She makes chocolate, and I, for now, am driving delivery. We spend our idle hours playing video games together and making snacks in our cozy little window in the skyline. Neither of us earns much, but we do well enough to get by most of the time, and take each other on the occasional night out for drinks, dinner, movies, or all of the above. About 2 weeks before this story's events occurred, I just lost a relatively high-paying job as a writer in a suburb of town. It was my first real job out of college. Anyway, on my first few days with no work to go to, I made a habit out of driving down to a nice spot on the lake. It was just a circular parking lot, nothing special, but it brought you close enough to the lake where you could see it without getting out of the car. It was just a tranquil place to hang out and spend some time. That day I had gone there specifically to look at the lake and watch the James Comey hearings on my phone, while occasionally switching to the Indeed app to send in some resumes. After I had been there for about an hour, I decided it was probably time to head home. As I backed out of the circular parking lot, I felt this sudden, irrepressible urge to look behind me. When I did, I saw a light blue late-model Hyundai pull in, and the driver was staring intensely at me. I looked away, assuming it was just an awkward moment, as these things usually are. When I looked again, he was still locked on me. I exited the parking lot, thinking he'd only just pulled in, and was thus unlikely to immediately leave. I glanced into my rear-view mirror as I drove away from the parking lot, and just as I was about to turn a corner, I saw that light blue Hyundai pull out and follow in my direction. Again, I brushed it off. Certainly it was a coincidence. Maybe he got to the lot and there were too many people there for his liking. What do I know, right? I decided that just to be safe, I would take a few odd turns on my way home to just ensure he isn't following me. There are two main roads in my town that are parallel to one another, with small residential streets bracing them. I took a path on these main roads and down side streets that nobody could have simply mimicked by chance. But after every turn, I would look back and there he was. Right turn, look in my rear view, there he is. Left turn, take a look, he's there again. My heart flutters a little as I start to realize something may actually be going on here. Now I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'11", 165 pounds soaking wet. I'm not a pushover, and I'd be prepared to defend myself, but I'd be lying if I said that I wouldn't avoid the outcome at all costs if I could help it. Bravado is a stupid reason to get killed. After he had followed me for far too long, I was totally fed up and decided to do something to decisively determine what the fuck was happening. I decided I'd pull into a gas station and up to the pump with a clear path in front of me. That way he would have to follow me in there or fuck off. I was hoping for the latter option, but I had no such luck. I pulled up to the pump, leaving my car in drive just in case I had to peel out of there. He pulls in behind me and up to the adjacent pump. His windows were so tinted I couldn't see inside. He'd had them down at the parking lot when I saw him staring. I begrudgingly lowered my window and he did the same, revealing his old, sunken face. He couldn't have been too much older than 50, 55, but this guy's face was sort of fucked up. I felt a primal, negative reaction to him immediately. It was powerful, and it stifled me. Seconds later I managed to find my voice. "Can I help you with something?" I half shouted. "You think I didn't notice you following me? What do you want?" His face grows angry and red before he simply says, "No, you're not her." He speeds away, tires screeching. At this point, I'm more confused than before. I'm angrier than before. I decide to call the police to report the incident. The dispatcher directed me to the park authorities. The officer asked if I would be willing to meet him down at the parking lot where the incident began to give a statement. Of course, I obliged. I drove directly there with new confidence. Even if the prick followed me back here, the cops are meeting me there. Problem solved, I thought to myself. I pulled into the parking lot and picked a spot in direct line of sight of the entrance so that the officer could easily spot me when he arrived. I was flipping through my phone to kill the idle time while I waited for the officer when I glanced up from my phone and, wouldn't you know it, that same light blue Hyundai was pulling into the lot. I couldn't believe it. Still, I remained unafraid. He did a circle around the lot and exited directly. It was as if he was just sweeping the area. Maybe he was looking for somebody. Finally, the officer showed up a few minutes later. I give him the rundown of what had happened, and then told him he had just been in the lot. 30 seconds later, the motherfucker pulls in the lot again. I point the car out to the officer, and impulsively shouted, "That's him!" before I remembered who I was talking to. The officer gave me a look of surprise, and directed it to pull into a parking spot and to turn the car off. He spent about 10 minutes talking to the guy. When he walked back over, he informed me that the man had said that I was doing something creepy, and he wanted to make sure I wasn't going to hurt anybody. I have to admit to chuckling a little bit at the accusation. The officer reassured me, though. They knew of this guy, but he didn't say what for. All he said was that the man was shaking and asking to apologize by the time the officer escorted him home. The man was told that he was not welcome back in the park due to his past behavior, and his following me all over town. I felt justice was applied and drove home happily, albeit indirectly. That night, my girlfriend and I were sitting on our third-story balcony smoking cigarettes and sipping on beers around 2 a.m. We were just talking and enjoying being home together, with no chores or obligations on our backs. The stress of my unemployment was momentarily dulled to a whisper in the back of my mind. But then we saw it. The light blue Hyundai, or at least what I thought was the light blue Hyundai, idling on the street. It was 2 houses down from our apartment building, and we were certainly visible. Of course, I'd already told Julia about what happened that day in detail, so when I put my finger to my lips and subtly gestured toward the idling car in the street, she understood what was happening. "I think that's the same car," I said. "I can't be certain, but it's definitely the same make and model." It was too dark to make out the exact color. The shade of light blue could easily have been confused with white at night time. I had written his license plate number in the notes in my phone and squinted to try to make out the plate from a distance. I could tell that the first 2 digits and the last matched, and that was enough for me. I called the police and explained the entire situation. As I was talking to the dispatcher, the car slowly pulls away. The dispatcher tells me there are officers nearby, and they will come inspect the area. I tell her that the car pulled off, but she reassured me that there were units very nearby, and they would look for him. They never found the car, and I triple-checked my locks that night. Nothing else abnormal occurred. After a few weeks had passed, Julia and I had all but forgotten about that odd and somewhat scary encounter. We both had a sweet tooth late one night, and decided to just hit the gas station on the corner for some crappy snacks and Gatorade. I needed gas anyway. Julia drove to the station, and I went into the store to get the goodies. As I was walking out of the store toward Julia and the car, I look over and that ugly fucking blue Hyundai pulled up, and that man is staring Julia down. I stared directly at him and he meets my gaze. I just stared and stared. I wanted him to know I saw him. I get to the car quickly and corral Julia inside. I lock the doors and explain what's going on. We're both pretty freaked out at this point, but doing our best to stay composed. We pull out and drive randomly under the assumption we're being followed. We dial the cops again, and they send out more cars to look. Nothing came of it, and we haven't seen the guy since. The only information we've learned was that the park rangers knew him because he had been caught following women around the trails of the park, particularly women with headphones on who were walking or jogging alone, something my girlfriend likes to do. His debacle with me was the last straw, and that is why he was banned from the park. My impression is that he had seen Julia driving my car around town, as she often does, and liked what he saw, having associated her with my car. It would explain why he followed me, hoping it was her. It's impossible to be sure, I guess. The police told us they would keep us posted if anything came of it, but just told us to call if we see him near us again. So, creepy guy who was probably stalking my girlfriend but stalked me instead, let's not meet. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 251. Don't worry, I will try and get a bit more variety out later in the week. It's just that these videos tend to be quicker for me to make. I'm hopefully back in the swing of things. I'm not promising daily uploads, but I will try for daily uploads. Voice still isn't 100%, but it's better than it has been. That's something. Hopefully it stays that way. Hopefully it doesn't get any worse. Other issues, ongoing doctor's appointments, blah 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 blah. I have a dermatologist for my psoriasis on Wednesday. That's not relevant. Just keeping you guys updated. Okay, and with that I am going to head off because I'm actually feeling well enough that I might be able to head out and actually I'm going to attempt to walk up the street, which is what I usually like to do. I like to walk everywhere, but I haven't been well enough to do that. And I'm going to attempt to walk up the street and do some grocery shopping like an adult. So we'll see what happens. And with that, I'm off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening and take very good care of yourselves.